A warning tonight from senior Brookings Institution fellow and Washington Post columnist Robert Kagan. The United States is heading into its greatest political and constitutional crisis since the Civil War, with a reasonable chance over the next 3 to 4 years of incidents of mass violence. A breakdown of federal authority and the division of the country into warring red and blue enclaves. Now, Kagan says distractions, denial, and wishful thinking are all it takes to drown out the alarm bells until it's too late. Well, those alarm bells got louder this week with the release of a 6-part wild legal fantasy by one of former President Trump's advisors, John Eastman.
That memo, again, is a blueprint to overthrow an election. I mean, that's what it is. It's a blueprint to overthrow the results of an election handed to the vice president of the United States, more or less, in the Oval Office.
Now, nearly a year after the election, the big lie is deeply rooted in the Republican Party's identity. In a recent CNN SRSS poll, 6 in 10 GOP voters said supporting Trump and believing he won in 2020 are a somewhat important part of what being a Republican means to them. To most of his diehard supporters, the violent insurrection on January 6 was actually an attempt to save democracy, even though more than 600 people have been charged with crimes tied to the attack, not to mention just all the violence we see here in this video. The sham Arizona audit didn't give Trump the win that he wanted either, but it did succeed in deepening distrust in the entire election system, and it set off a rash of other audits in battleground states, even though their elections were deemed free and fair by the courts.
We know that the people who are involved, the cyber ninjas, they came into this with preconceived notions. They've already stated they believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump back in November of 2020, and they're going to continue forward with these type of allegations that are baseless.
And now there's going to be an audit in Texas after Trump demanded that Republican Governor Greg Abbott investigate election fraud without any evidence. By the way, Trump won Texas. Another sign of the power that the ex-president has over Republicans whose political survival is tied to his good favor and the support of his base. Meantime, Trump and his allies are working behind the scenes to put loyalists in charge of future elections. Reuters reviewed statements by 15 declared Republican candidates for Secretary of State in 5 battleground states and interviewed 9 of them. 10 of them said they believed the election was stolen or called for the results to be invalidated, and only 2 said that Biden won the election. Donald Trump is a leader of the Republican Party. He is flush with cash, and if he does run in 2024, he'll be better positioned than ever to contest election results not in his favor. So take a moment to really step back, connect the dots on how our democracy is under attack from within. For the record, the big lie isn't about overturning the last election. It's about winning the next one. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about and frankly concerned about as we look ahead, particularly when I read what you just wrote recently, Rick, in a law review article. You said the United States faces a serious risk that the 2024 presidential election and other future U.S. elections will not be conducted fairly, and that the candidates taking office will not reflect the free choices made by eligible voters. I mean, that is alarming. That is what democracy is all about, that whoever is elected represents the will of the people. What do you see, Rick, as the biggest threat to our democracy and our elections at this point?
Well, I never expected to write those words about the United States. I never thought in our lifetime we would worry about elections being subverted, about elections being stolen. But ironically, the Donald Trump false claims that the last election was stolen and the claims that are now believed by millions of people have greatly increased the chances that the next time around, one way or another, we could see a stolen election in 2024. If elected officials and election officials believe the big lie and they're willing to do something to counter what they see as the big lie, such as by changing the rules or by ignoring the rules, then we're in really serious trouble in this country because, as you say, a democracy depends on conducting a fair vote and for the winner to actually be declared the winner. It's really the very basis of what a democratic system is.
And you say, Rick, that the fact that former President Trump has repeatedly and falsely claimed the 2020 election was stolen from him has actually markedly raised the potential for an actual stolen election. How strong of an impact do you believe the big lie has had on our democracy?
Well, I think that the entire Trump campaign, which, if you remember back in 2016, he claimed that there was massive voter fraud in the election that he won. He has undermined millions of people's confidence in the election system. He has caused these audits to take place, these fake audits to happen. Even after the Arizona fake audit couldn't reach the results that Trump won in Arizona, they're still trying to do this. They're trying to undermine people's confidence in the process, and they're installing people in office, and they're trying to elect people in office who endorse Trump's views. I mean, do you really want someone counting the votes in the state of Arizona, the state of Georgia, who believes or states that he or she believes the false claim that the election was stolen? How can we trust that they're going to fairly count the votes next time?
Yeah, and I want to bring you in because you tweeted this. Something dangerous and terrible has been unleashed in this country. Typically, normal people are threatening school boards, journalists, neighbors. Trump poured the gasoline before the pandemic, which set it on fire. I fear the explosion is yet to come. Sort of echoing what Rick was just saying there. What do you believe brought us to this point? You mentioned both former President Trump and the pandemic. What else?
Well, you know, if you look around the world, democracy is actually in the midst of a grave recession. In the last quarter of the 20th century, democracy spread to more countries and improved in the countries that it was in pretty consistently. And according to all of the major international indexes that study this, it plateaued around 2005, 2006, and has been in retreat. And you see in countries like Hungary and Poland and Venezuela, they're no longer really democratic, although they still purportedly hold elections. And now 3 of the 4 largest democracies in the world, India, Brazil, and the United States, have been governed by autocrats in recent years. And what is the thing that is going to stop us from falling down that path is if we recognize that we are not immune to this global trend. It's only by thinking that it can't happen here that it could.
So how do you combat it? And by the way, that is why on this show we shine a spotlight on this on a pretty regular basis, because it's so important to recognize it before it is too late, right? But how do you combat it when you now have, according to the latest CNN poll, 78% of Republicans saying they believe the election was stolen? We just talked about another poll earlier that it's really such a big part of their DNA now, their identity as a Republican. How do you, and there's so much misinformation, people just looking online, saying in their little echo chambers of misinformation. And when you have leaders spewing the lie or staying silent, what do you do?
I mean, first we have to understand what has happened in the past, because past is prelude. As the Yale historian Timothy Snyder has said, a practice coup or a failed coup is practice for a successful coup. And so we have to look at what happened last time, right? It was a 6-step attempted coup by former President Trump. Step 1 was make it harder for people to vote. Step 2 was prematurely and falsely claim victory and claim that any late votes being counted, mail ballots, were fraudulent and not legitimate. Step 3 was gum up the courts with thousands of frivolous suits to make it seem like there was something to those fraud claims and to delay certification. Step 4 was then get state legislatures to step in and appoint their own slate of electors. Step 5 was then get the Congress on January 6th to accept that other slate of electors. And then step 6, if all else failed, was send a violent mob into an insurrection at the Capitol. And we need to make sure that we stop all of those things from happening next time. And I'll say one thing that could happen right now, which is the Congress could pass the new Freedom to Vote Act, which has provisions in it that try to make it less likely for those things to succeed the next time. And the last piece, and we can't let them off the hook, Republicans in the Senate need to band together with Democrats to protect our republic.
Rick, I want to go to you about this Washington Post reporting that was out just this last week. You have Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Mike Lee both reviewing Trump's claims of election fraud back in January and determined they were bunk. Yet they have still refused to separate their party from Trump, and both voted against a bipartisan commission to review the January 6th Capitol riot. What does that say to you? Well,
I think that we have a very narrow window here. this is not going to be led by Republicans. Republicans are still afraid of Trump, or they're trying to ride Trump's coattails. We know that Lindsey Graham embraced Trump when he was running for re-election, and he and Mitch McConnell, they backed off a little bit on January 6th after the insurrection, but that moment of bipartisanship has passed. So one of the things I think we need to see is if Democrats have to go it alone, they're going to have to blow up the filibuster to pass election reforms like requiring paper ballots, not things that are partisan, things that should help ensure a fair election, setting the rules for how you decide when you can send in a different slate of electors, all kinds of technical things. And hopefully there'll be some Republicans who listen to what Mitch McConnell said on January 6th, who will go along, even if there aren't 10 of them. This is the moment that this has to happen before it's too late.